What is up, my Bat Rican family? How you doing today we're going through some cemeteries, and we're gonna see what we see, right? I mean, I like this. It's pretty cool so far. You know, our tour guide is showing us around and stuff like that. But like I always say, if you see something, hear something, let me know, and let's go check this out.
So I want to go over just a couple things before we walk in here. One, in Judea, they have a very strict, or a term you may have heard of before, called mitzvah. And this particular mitzvah, and what mitzvahs mean, is timed events that happen when something initiates it. And of course, what initiates the one we're talking about is death. The first thing the family goes through is called ananut. It is a 24-hour period from the time the body dies to the time it goes into the ground. The rabbi has a group of people called Havakadish, and these are, it's a very thankless, payless job. A group of people, part of the congregation, some will go collect the body, prepare it for burial, bathe it, wrap it into a shroud. Others will come dig the hole, prepare the body to be placed in the ground. Others will prepare the casket. In some cases, we didn't have enough caskets. We'll talk about that later. But essentially, the body goes into the ground, the soil goes back in, and you've reached the end of ananut. Now, the family starts a series of mourning processes. The first one is called Kriva. Then they go to Shiva, Shalashim, Krizkor. And in Kriva, the old style was they would cut the lapel of the jacket and rip it. Now they kind of evolved to a little ribbon. They'll cut the bottom of the ribbon and rip it. And what that means to you, if you didn't know, when you see that, chances are that they are Jewish and that they just lost somebody. What it means to them, somebody's been ripped out of their life. Now, the reason I say chances are is because when you're walking around the Bucharest and admiring all the fantastic scenery there, you may come across a person with those two green hand grenade drinks in their hand. You probably have seen them as you've walked around, and his or her lapel may be all ripped up. That does not necessarily mean that they're Jewish and have lost somebody. Matter of fact, if they get to their third hand grenade, the only thing they would have lost would be their name. The next phase is called Shiva, and this is 7 days in home, very intense mourning. Don't leave the house for any reason unless it's on fire. The next phase is called Shalashim, and so after that 7-day period, they got a 30-day period of Shalashim, and it kind of looks like Shiva, except they can leave the house now. They go back to work, etc. Over the next year, 4 times a year, they do what's called Krizkor. They'll do a prayer to remember their loved one. The prayer is called Kaddish, and then at the end of the year, the anniversary date, they reach what's called Avalut. So they went from Ananut to Avalut. In Avalut, the first phase is called the Unveiling. The Unveiling is when the headstone comes in. So if it is the first person buried there for the entire year inside that coping grave, there is no headstone. But there is a marker. Let's go see what it looks like. Look here to your left, you'll see a stone kind of leaned up against the headstone there. That would have been the cube stone that would have laid in the ground for the entire year. Now here's where this gets weird. Remember the French thought that the flesh needed to decay off the bone so the spirit would go wherever it's going? Mm-hmm. So do the Jewish. The Jewish believe the spirit actually hovers around the grave, where in the French, the spirit is free roaming. Okay, a little bit different. Now, when I talk about discrimination, most people think of race or gender or preference. Pick any reason, a good reason of why you could classify something as discrimination, but not here in New Orleans in the 1700s. We discriminated against you because of your religion. And you couldn't even live here unless you were Catholic. You had to convert or leave. Now, by 1803, we become a colonial territory of the United States, and at that point, that rule goes out the window, but the bullying didn't stop, right? So the Catholics were bullies. I'm Catholic, so yes, I'm going to pick on them all day. One of the things that the Jewish families wanted was something a little bit more fancier than that little cube stone out there. But most of the cemeteries here were all Catholic. So everything that got tailored to here were all Catholic. And so they chose this. These little flower vase stones here, you can engrave a name, a mother, father, initial on it, but they were designed to put flowers in here. What you will not see in this cemetery in those vases are flowers, because in Judea they don't believe in bringing flowers here. And the 1 or 2 times that you will see flowers in the cemetery, chances are the person that came in to visit that person wasn't Jewish and just didn't. Now, when you look at the headstones here, you'll notice one thing right away. They all face the same direction.
Right.
And if we could open up a world map and draw a straight line through it, it would go right through the center of Jerusalem. So the headstones face Jerusalem. You'll notice that 99% of them have a lot of the same things on them. We'll start with that from the top, work our way to the bottom. You have 2 letters that look like a J and a D. That means here lies. Then you see the large Jewish name there. Then underneath that, you'll see their given name. And underneath that, you'll start seeing the date of birth or the date of death. In some cases where you don't see the date of death, it is not unusual where they came from. Records weren't kept like that. My wife's best friend is a refugee from Vietnam, came over here in the 70s. She thinks she's 50 now. I say she's 90, but she's my wife's best friend, not mine. The bottom letters there you see come out of the book of Samuel. And that represents, may their spirit bond with the bounds of eternal life. In some cases, you'll see just the menorah, the candlestick holder. In some cases, you'll see just the Star of David. In some cases, you'll see both. What the Star of David and the menorah represent when it's singular on the tomb is that the menorah, the first person buried there, or the only person buried there, is a woman. Where Star of David represents the opposite. First person, only person buried there is a man. When you see doubled up, means husband and wife. Now, when we get to the St. Patrick Cemetery and go into Cypress Grove Cemetery, what you're going to notice is that you'll see dozens of people buried in a coping grave. But in the Jewish cemetery, it is usually limited to 1 or just 2 people. And very seldom will there be more than that. There are a few cases to that buried here. Children, of course, get their own grave, and teenagers get something a little different. We're going to talk about that in a second. A couple other things you'll notice here. Let's see if there's any here. There's one right behind you. See the little pebble sitting on top of the headstone there? Yeah. And if you look over here, you'll see a few rocks. As I take you through this cemetery, as we get to the newer part of it, you're going to see those rocks everywhere. And what that represents, that dates back thousands of years ago. Some say even 4,000 years ago, where when you came to visit your loved one, you placed a rock on top of the headstone to show that you've come and respect, so that they could see the stone from heaven. Now, once the stone gets up there, it can't ever come off. We got this thing here in Louisiana called hurricanes, and the wind sometimes will blow them off, and once they blow off, they're off. That's why you will see big rocks laying around here, because once they have fallen off, you do not put them back on. All right, follow me this way. Here's another Avalute stone there.
There's a lot of old stones here. They all look new, but they're old.
As I mentioned, adults get the standard grave here. Infants get their own grave, but they will not go into a coping grave. Usually because the family didn't buy one at the time, they may have lost their child. And the child is essentially just wrapped into a shroud, not even in a casket, placed straight into the soil. And there's no fear of that rising back up. Teenagers, on the other hand, get something different. They get this. This is a shaft coming out of the headstone. It represents a tree. You'll see it's chiseled at an angle. Here they've got some leaves cut into it. And what this represents is that this tree, metaphorically, has been chopped down. And that this teenager, who didn't reach adulthood, life had been cut too short. You'll see there's 4 of them here. A couple of headstones have fallen over. You'll see there's 2 more at the end of this sidewalk, and as you scan across the cemetery, you'll see that there's a total of 24 of those all throughout. And this is a relatively small cemetery. Nah, I'm kidding you. It is tiny. And so the fact that you have that many represented in here is a lot when you get into some of our other cemeteries. Now, if you would, as you walk through here, we're actually going to be kind of walking through the oldest part of the cemetery, and then within 20 feet, we're into a newer part. So you can again see that it kind of stretches along this way here. So if y'all would, follow me out this way.
you like this, smash that like button. If you see something, hear something, write it down.
Two more over there. So that's an interesting question. We're not sure, and here's why. We think they borrowed this from the Catholics because in the Irish Catholic cemetery, you can have dozens of people buried in that one little grave. I know it sounds crazy, but you'll see it for yourself. And then at that point, whoever now owns that grave of that family member says, I'm buying my own grave, and mom's the last one to die, so we cap it off, meaning no one else is going to be buried there. Why the Jewish do it, we don't know, because you can see they really only bury 1 or 2 people per, so it wasn't because of that. We think it might have been because of just the extra layer of protection for the next big flood that's coming. Now, you don't see this often in a cemetery here. This is called a Yorkshire Campbell. Most Jewish families do this at home, and every year on the anniversary date of their death, they will burn the Yorkshire. Yorkshire just simply means here. You have urns here. Now, urns were, of course, a collection of ashes from cremations. But here's the weird part. They don't cremate. So why are they there? Well, what it represents is in the same symbolism of the teenager whose life was cut too short. This person here died of some form of disease, and they did not live out their full life. The disease interrupted that. And one of the ways they showed that is by putting the urns up here on the headstone. They use it simply because Protestants used it in their headstones, and you'll see that all in the city cemetery. You'll see these everywhere, but with a different meaning. Now, just a couple before we make our right turn here, you'll start to see these rocks everywhere, right? Nice big rocks of people coming to visit. We're kind of in the newer part of the cemetery here. There is actually some space in the back over there. But here's something you won't see in the Jewish cemetery anywhere. You look to your left, you'll see the Christianity cross. Why would you see that in the Jewish cemetery? Well, you won't, because that is a Catholic cemetery. And this is trying to demonstrate how much these cemeteries are all pinched in here together. Right where this cemetery ends, at that fence, you can see graves in the Catholic cemetery, all squeezed in together, and they are all one right behind the other. The other thing you'll kind of notice about our cemeteries is we have neighborhoods around them, and people buy houses and rent houses here, and the view of their back or their front yards is voila, the same thing you're seeing now. And some people like that here about New Orleans. Some people think it's creepy. Just your preference.
Go ahead. This is so cool. Look at that. So this is the New Orleans. Look at these headstones right there.
The lighthouse you see right here, this was started by the Offner family. They're still here today, actually. And they started what was called the Lighthouse School of the Blind. It is a school that's still in play here. It's all around the country, but it was originally for Jewish children that were blind. The statues at every one of their schools, it's no longer limited to Jewish children. Any family can enroll into it. And it's no longer limited to blindness. Other disabilities are available as well. In that statue that's at every school, what you'll notice about is there's never any power that's run to it. So the lighthouse does not work. And the reason why is in its original concept, children couldn't see it to begin with. So the light shined through the edge of it, what the symbolism of this represents. going to go out this way. Large concrete quadrant here. It had been concreted much later. It was soil at one time, but there are 3 different types of burials here, and I want to talk about those. You'll notice the brownstone's not in the same direction of all the others. Well, that's because it's not a headstone, it's a memorial. And after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, as people started to migrate here in just random numbers, the city decided to quadrant off neighborhoods. So what I'm essentially getting to is the Irish live together, the Italians live together, the Spanish live together, the French live together, the Americans kind of live together, and they divided these neighborhoods up by this big median you see like in Canal Street. So if you get to tour like the Garden District, you'll see these huge medians all dividing the neighborhoods up. And we, funny enough, we don't call them medians, we call them neutral grounds. And it was a law that did 2 things. One, whoever lived on this side of the community and whoever lived on that side of the community could come to that neutral ground and exact commerce. If you made it or baked it, you could sell it there, make income, and no violence was allowed there, which I think is hilarious because that says, well, then does that mean violence is allowed over there? Right? Didn't make sense. But we also think it's where the term neutral corner comes from in boxing. Because once the referee sends you to that neutral corner, you're not allowed to fight anymore. But you were not allowed to fight any form of violence out there. Now, with that said, in 1867, in the Jewish community, they had a major yellow fever outbreak. Now, the headstones that you see laying all around here, you'll see one type, which are the vertical headstones, sticking up out of the ground. Those are people who bought that spot but hadn't died yet by 1867. And the stones that you see laying on the ground horizontally, those are called ledger stones. Those were people that died in that yellow fever outbreak that we knew who they were. And that's how we identify those. The cubes, like number 41, were people that died in the Jewish community. We had no clue who they were. There's 73 of these, all stretched out. One behind you right there seems to be a small child. All here, and we had, again, no clue who these people were. And they identified them very simply just by putting a number there. Follow me this way. So, if you remember, I was talking about the people that would come collect the body, dig the hole, prepare the casket. This is their names here. They're not buried here. They're buried throughout the cemetery. But this is their recognition for the service that they contributed to the Jewish community. Over here is just another little patch of children's graves. You can see the Wickard family had 2 children die in the very same year. We noticed that in a lot of cases you'll see the term infant sometimes up to a year of death, which means that they just hadn't named them at that point when the baby died. You can see Sadie right here. If you look at her date, she died before she reached 3 years old. And she has a lot of rocks on there. And what we essentially think it is because she was 2 years old, she is the first child's grave you come to when you walk in the main gate, that people are just, that who knows who her family is, if they're even still alive. But people are just leaving this as just kind of respect for little Sadie. All right, follow me outside. James Caldwell's tomb. He's the one that invented the gas lanterns. So if you're walking through the city tonight and you see those gas lanterns up, he's the one that started the first prototype, but they didn't use natural gas like we do today. Right. They used, you ready for this? Methane gas. Where do you get methane gas from? Horse poo. And they would take horse poo and water, put it in a sack, bury it in the ground, run a pipe out of it, and voila, you got methane. We're going to talk about that in a second.
You get an address.
Check out these cool mausoleums. They're not all the same.
So this tomb right here is what you would call a shaft tomb, and let me walk you through this. What they do when they start building these is the first thing they do is they dig down into the ground about 3 feet in, and they create what's called a caveau. It's a French word for cave. They'll brick and mortar it up, but then they'll run a slab over the top of it, and the back side of that slab they run a chimney out of it. The chimney's called the shaft. That's where the name comes from. And then inside the tomb you have multiple compartments. Now in the 1700s, 1789, when they started going to this type of tomb, and then the 1820s, they were basically singular tombs. You only put one body. Why? You just rented one of those little side vaults. Wasn't a big deal. But by the 1830s, we're dying too much, so that didn't work. And a lot of families didn't want to put their loved ones in one of those little wall vaults, so they put in a tomb that had multiple tombs, so you could bypass the 366. Now, the way they processed your body. When you ask, if I buy one of these, what happens to the bones? Well, the way they process this is one, they couldn't open it for 1 year and 1 day until after 1902. So when they pull the body out, the Spanish were right. These things get really hot. We know now they get about 350 degrees in the summertime. So they bake it down. All the bones are brittle, and there is nothing left. No skin tissue, nothing. Everything is cooked down. They take the bones, they put them into a sack, they discard everything else. The bones are then pulverized with a mallet because it needs to be kind of like sand almost, but they don't pulverize that far, just smaller pieces. And the reason why is they're going to seal the bag back up, place it on one of these shelves, depending on which tomb they open up. They're going to shove it all the way back with this long stick called a dead stick. When it gets all the way to the back, it finds that shaft, falls down, and goes into the caveau. So when you buy one of these tombs, if there is a body sitting in here, they will process it, get it into the caveau, and that way you're getting a tomb that's ready for the next burial. The tomb across from you, right behind you, is Charles Lee's tomb. Ironically, with the floods of Katrina, he's the guy that created the canal system to drain all the floodwaters outside of downtown to get them back to the lake. Now they've been modified and pumps have been added, but at the end of the day he was known as the father of water because he helped the flooding with inside of New Orleans. Where James Caldwell was called the father of light because he, that first tomb I showed you over there, he was the guy that created the gas line. Follow me this way. John Monroe was a nephew of James Monroe, our 5th president of the United States.
Oh, wow.
Came down here to be an actor, wasn't any good. Because of who his uncle was, they pushed him into politics. Wasn't any good there either. Kind of an important little spot right here. You're going to notice a couple things. One, you'll see a lot of symbolism on the tops of the tombs. You'll notice here it has several. If we could squeeze forward a little bit, there's a cyclist coming through right behind us. Notice there's a woman at the top dropping a rose. The rose represents one soul. These vases that you will see in and around the tombs like this is for a collection of souls. This is where the souls are collected. She's dropping that rose into the vase. Notice in her left hand, there are several more roses indicating that inevitably there are more to die. There are urns that you'll see on the tops of the tombs. When they have the flames coming out of it, this family here believes in the afterlife. They believe they're going to live after they die. In some cases, you'll see urns like this that have a cloth over the top. That has a ton of symbolism in it. And what it represents is, the reason it's half covered is the part that is not covered represents the portion of your life. The portion that is covered represents death happening. What's behind the cloth? Well, whatever you think is going to happen to you when you die, that process that we can't scientifically prove is behind the cloth. And that's what it represents. This guy right here, James Caan, was part of our history we wish we could forget. He was Louisiana's largest slave owner.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Now, just like Charles Lee's tomb, it's a visiting tomb. You would actually go inside of that, and you would talk and pray and argue with your loved one, whatever it is that you wanted to do. They've chained that up for vandalism there, but the lock was originally on the gate. Where Charles Leeds' tomb, lock was inside the door itself. If you look right here on the second row, you'll see the family tomb of Grind It Off. Means that that is a purchased tomb. Whoever purchased that tomb has to put a new closure tablet up, and they ask the existing family what they want done with the old one. And usually those get destroyed, because what do you do with it? You ship that to your house and put it in your front yard. I mean, that's only cool in October, right? You'll also notice that there are several spots in this cemetery that are still available. These places are still open for you to buy. This whole section, this was going to be somebody's and just never finished it. But you can see this section is still open, this section is still open here. Let me show you this down here if you follow me this way. You'll notice two names on this tomb. You'll see Song at the top, and the third person buried there is called Tom. Let me show you what they built. Follow me this way.
These are some cool mausoleum.
This tomb here is called the Sun On Tong tombs by three families, two of which are buried there. This was for Chinese immigrants that didn't want to be buried here. And so when they died, they built this structure here. There are several tombs inside there, you'll see. But you'll also notice as we get up to it, you'll see there's a fireplace in it. That fireplace was designed to burn what was called Josh money. Josh money is a term for ghost money. And they would burn bills to send to their ancestors in the spirit world in order to make their life in the spirit world better. Now this is called a society tomb, and because it's a society tomb, they own all the property that you're standing on, and that you're okay. But what I'm getting at is they don't have to coordinate with the cemetery to do a funeral here. We're not sure when the last one was, and the reason why is a lot of that stuff down there all looks new. The new urn there that they would burn the Josh money in, they don't use the fireplace anymore, but you can see that all that stuff doesn't look that old.
So they still practice burning money?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Family owned this tomb here before 1902, and someone died in January 1, you couldn't open it to January 2 of the following year. Someone dies 6 months later, what do? You call the cemetery and you rent one of those. Those are the wall vaults. They're on both sides of the cemetery. They go almost all the way down the length of the cemetery. Now, the reason you don't have closure tablets on them is because after 1902, we don't need them anymore. And what a lot of private cemeteries did is they sold them as your permanent grave. You could buy it for a few $1,000s when you didn't want to pay tens of thousands of dollars, something like this, right? Now, with that said, what did they do with these? Well, a new invention in the 20th century called the metal detector. People started going to old Civil War battlefields, digging up bullets and buttons, and disturbing graves. So the Department of Defense decided to exhume all of those bodies nationwide, and to my surprise, in Louisiana, we had 27 Civil War battles, all very small. But when they exhumed all those bodies, even though we knew who they were that died, we didn't know who was buried there. So essentially they become the unknown soldiers. And so who's buried here are the unknown soldiers, Union and Confederate, that died here in Louisiana during the Civil War.
Oh wow, nice.
You'll also notice here, you'll see this grave. Notice there's not a slab underneath it like you see over here. Well, remember, the shaft tombs will have a slab. This would be called a short shelf tomb. I'm going to show you the inside of one of these. I don't know if you read all your paperwork, but y'all were supposed to bring a shovel. Did y'all saw it? No? These are built essentially the same, but the body isn't pulled out. The body's pushed to the back, falls off the shelf, and goes into the caveau that way. And under no circumstances can you do it with a casket, because you can't have the casket all jammed up there. You'll notice headstones here. And what this is, at some point in this family, they found Aunt Becky. And they went and had her body exhumed, brought the remains over here, and the tradition is you bring the headstones with you. And apparently they found a couple of family members.
Wow. Oh wow, this one's destroyed.
So, a lot to talk about here. Why is this tomb destroyed? Why is that tomb destroyed? Well, it's real simple. The families planted trees so they could come out here in the summertime and not be in that sweltering heat. The roots grew underneath the tomb and destroyed it. Started to shift it, moved it, all fell apart. If you want to know what this tomb looked like before it fell, look across the street. See the white tombs there? It's the exact same architect built that one and built these two.
Wow.
This one collapsed back in October. Now, if you can look back at it, they grinded the tree out just about a month ago. But you can see it's missing some pieces. It's missing a bottom slab there. The top slab is kind of broken off. This would have been a short shelf tomb. The caveau is down at the bottom, but it's got a lot of debris in it. But you can see how the construction is going down into the ground. That's where they would have pushed the body off and it would have fell down. What's interesting about these tombs is this tomb here is called the Smith tomb. This tomb over here is the McElhenney tomb. And this is Katie McElhenney. Her husband and her child are buried there. Now, if McElhenney's not ringing a bell with you, next time you pick up a bottle of Tabasco sauce, look at it. It says McElhenney, Avery Island. Edmund McElhenney, when his daughter married into the Smith family and Edmund bought this plot. He worked for the guy in that white tomb there called Munsell White. Munsell White was, that's right, Tabasco farmer. When Munsell dies in 1863, you can see how close these two families were. When he dies in 1863, he leaves New Orleans, goes to New Iberia, buys a bunch of land, now called Avery Island, and starts a Tabasco farm. 5 years later, in 1868, he says, look what I created. It's the second oldest food patent in the U.S. patent office, and his family. So I'd like to introduce you to the Slark family here on your left, and the Letchford family here on your right. The Slark and Letchfords have the most iconic tombs in this cemetery. To rebuild these today and the way they were built back then would run you about $500,000 each.
Wow.
Now, with that said, these two men competed in every form that you can imagine. He had a series of hardware stores, and he had a merchant business. He sold to ships. There's a story that they bet one time $300 on 2 blades of grass, or which blade would grow faster. That's equivalent to about 10 grand today. Now, the next story I'm getting ready to share with you about Slarks, there's a lot of conjecture in there. Some of this is kind of hard to prove, but we know a couple of facts. One, he was in a horse carriage on his way to what's called the La Provincial Hotel today. It was the hospital here in the 1800s on Charter Street. Sarah, his daughter, was injured in a non-life-threatening accident. Now, Sarah was his oldest daughter and kind of like his fave, so to speak. Apparently, somebody in the carriage asked Slark if he knew that Letchford had just bought a plot in Cypress Grove. Allegedly, he turns the buggy around, comes straight out here, confirms that Letchford bought this piece of land, and he buys that. Now, the reason that we don't know which row happened, right, because some of that stuff's hard to prove, is we know the fact of the day that he went to the hospital, the day she was injured, when she was administered there, and we also know the date that he bought this. Those two dates match up. Now, interesting enough, what we don't know is if Sarah ever found out about it or held some grudge against her dad. It could have been several reasons. Maybe she thought he was buying a plot because this injury was more serious than it was, and she was going to be dying soon. Maybe he was putting his own ambitions against his competitor over the care of his own daughter. We don't know that. What we do know is that she marries the Letchford son. And she married William Henry Letchford. She has a child, and when she becomes ill, the Slark family begs her to be buried in the Slark tomb. She says, nope, I want to be buried with my husband when he dies. And so the Letchford family pays to put Sarah Augusta Letchford on the tomb, but the Slark family is not going to allow that to happen. They actually put 2 guards at the gates. When the engraver came in, they gave him 2 options. It says, you can either take this bag of cash, or you can disappear. And he says, what do you mean disappear? It's like the cemetery. Who would ever know you're gone? And where would they even begin to look to find him? He says, what's option 1 again? And so they instructed him to put Sarah Augusta Slark, but here's the catch. Every place I have taken you to this afternoon, every name you have seen on every grave you've walked by is all horizontal. And they had him engrave her name in an arch. Instead of Letchford, they put Sarah Augusta Slark, and they were trying to force one of 2 things. The Slark family wanted the name Slark on the top of both tombs, and if the family was not going to accept that, they were going to have to move that stone to another side. And of course, it gets left here just like that. And it goes on to show that when Slark bought this, he actually hired the architect. When Letchford finds out, he hires the same architect. This architect writes a book. This drama just doesn't seem to stop. The architect says that they kept showing up at his office saying, build mine bigger, build mine taller, build mine. And so his plan was, he got so aggravated with it, he used a series of optical illusions. One, you can see the steps here are built higher than the steps over here. The building is more pointier but shorter, where this building is more rounder but taller. And you can see that the crests are different on each top. The crest is shorter on this one, the crest is longer on this one. Essentially, he built these exactly the same height to get back at these 2 families. His plan was, when they complained about it, he knew that they would. He met the Letchfords at that gate down there. They walked down Magnolia Street here and says, what are you talking about? Yours is clearly taller. Look at it. And then he met the Slark family down at the little mini gate down there and walked down this side of the street and says, look, what are you talking about? You can see that. As you see right here, you're at the intersection of Magnolia and Myrtle. You notice someone mentioned that we had street signs here. And the reason for that is why we call it the City of the Dead.
I'm gonna let you go, but for right now, you have a great day, and we'll catch you in the next adventure, okay? Later.